Hello guys, we are from CreateZim and this week we are talking about Suicide Prevention Week. My name is Tanya Razwa and I'll be leading this discussion alongside Anopa. If you'd like to introduce yourself.
Hello guys, I'm a CreateZim volunteer. My name is Anupam Rambio and I'm 19 years old. Yeah, I think that's about it. Okay.
Okay, so today we are joined here with 4 students and one of our psychologists.
Okay, hi everyone. My name is Umukhulu Pikinini, but friends call me Bishop. I'm a college student in Lehigh University in the United States, and I'm doing my second year. I'm taking a degree in mechanical engineering and another degree in psychology. So I'm a double degree major. Thank you.
Fantastic. And
Hello, my name is Rihanna. I am a third-year pharmacy student in the UK, and I am 21 years old.
and if next we could introduce our psychologist Clement, please.
Hello guys, and thank you for having me on board. And by the way, I'm an occupational therapist, so psychosocial occupational therapist. And thank you for having me on board.
Thank you, Clement. And thank you guys for joining us. So as we said, we're as I said, we are volunteers from CreateZim, and as I said, we'll be focusing this week on the suicide prevention. So first off, it's just going to be an open discussion. So at the moment, suicide is the second largest leading death in the world in 15 to 16-year-olds. And I just wanted to open the board to ask people, why do you think it is so common in 15 to 26-year-olds in the younger generation?
Okay, I think if you look at 15 to 16-year-olds, that's the age where you have things like peer pressure. That's the age where you're trying to figure yourself out, trying to fit in, and you have these problems just coming in and out, and you that's sort of like the confusion phase where you're trying to really figure out what's going on. So it's easy for you to be depressed because you think maybe you're not who you want to be or you are not fitting in. So when you feel like you're not good enough, it might be a cause of suicide.
Thank you, Anupa. I asked Rihanna.
Sorry.
Okay.
I think going on from what was previously said, when you're a young person and you're going through those struggles, especially coming from probably a BAME background, if you're not able to speak about those issues and therefore find a solution, that also adds to the problem. So if you have a situation where you feel like you don't have a relationship with your parents or someone older than you, especially in your family, where you can kind of offload about your issues or whatever it is you want to resolve, then that almost feels like you're carrying a much heavier weight than what your issues may actually be, and that can become quite overwhelming for some young people who aren't equipped to deal with struggles that they're dealing with.
Hannah.
Yeah, I think some of the panelists have already said, like one of the key things that we have especially lost the family bond. I think one of my key interests is really what happened to the structure of the family, because that's the primary basis of support or the prime foundation of support. And also one thing we've noticed is that there's a growing rate of mental health problems. So about 90% of the people who commit suicide have at least one mental problem by the time they do so. So it's also more fundamentally a question of what's happening to the mental health of young people. And there could be many factors that do that, and we should really get down to that bottom issue, which is mental health. Because suicide is more like the outcome of that.
Thank you.
Yes, so if I may come in there and weigh my comment about that, the bottom line of it all is like what all the previous speakers have highlighted. The upsurge in mental health disorders or in common mental disorders, it correlates to the problem that then we see manifesting as suicide. So the rise in depression in this particular age group, the rise in anxiety, stress, or other mood disorders, and the increase in substance use disorders correlates with the problem of suicide. What normally happens in this particular age group is that their health-seeking behaviors are not well developed. So they have these problems, but they don't know how to manage them or where to get help. So it's a complex phenomenon of suicide in this particular age group, but it correlates with the upstage in substance use and other common mental disorders.
Thank you, Clement. That's such a good point that you've raised, I think, especially in regards to substance misuse. I think that's something that has become a lot more common and to raise. Thank you for sharing that with us. Okay, so as a lot of us know, there has been a widespread pandemic at the moment in regards to coronavirus, which has affected many families and many people, and a lot of people have had to stay at home and indoors. So do you think that the cause of coronavirus could have actually increased suicide rate that affected young people or older people that may have suicidal thoughts?
I think with that, it definitely would have had an effect on people's mental health and having the space and time to think about and consider suicide. I say that because I think coronavirus caught everybody out all over the world. Like nobody knew what to do about it, especially in the beginning. And even still, there's so many countries, and even on a smaller level, like nations and organizations that don't know what to do about it or how to accommodate it and continue as normal, if you like. So for that reason, people have less access to services that they would have had access to otherwise. And even what may be normal for them, which was helping them to cope with their mental health at the time, that may not be available to them anymore. So it may have caused quite a disturbance in their coping mechanisms.
Definitely. Thank you, Rihanna. If I could ask Bishop, if you have any point of view.
Well, as for the coronavirus pandemic issue and the current situation, I think one of the trends noticed, especially when people go down the path of suicidality, is there's one trend, which is the tendency to pull away from people, so isolate. Now, what we are doing, for example, in a situation like this with coronavirus, we've already satisfied or ticked that box, already self-isolated people, puts them in a position where now because one of the other key critical symptoms is people being overcritical about themselves. I usually say one thing is that one of the worst things you can do to people is to lock them up with their own thoughts, because not many people can actually know how to handle their own thoughts or their own emotions. And that's exactly what we're doing to teenagers. We're locking them indoors and making them handle their own thoughts. And really, the way they escape that is to reflect upon their own thoughts using social activities. That's why it's very important that they go out and play games and have friends around. But it's very difficult to satisfy all those social needs at a time like this, which would make them very vulnerable to things like suicidal thoughts.
Thank you, Bishop. I think that's a really good point that you've raised there. Again, especially with people being stuck inside, like you said, you can kind of dwell on your own thoughts a lot, which can kind of lead towards. Thank you for sharing that with us.
A therapist point of view, what I'm seeing is that, with COVID-19 came the disablement of the human mind and the feelings of hopelessness and helplessness, which are already part and parcel of suicidal ideation. Because with COVID, it came and we didn't have solutions other than to lock people down. So that feeling of not being able to help yourself is the same process that people who are suicidal go through. So in one way or the other, the COVID-19 pandemic and how we handled it in the response strategies like the lockdowns was more like mimicking the process of suicidal ideation. And now we have people who are locked down from sources of help. And these people are likely to think that taking my own life can be one of the viable options, considering what I have at hand. So all those are the intricacies of how the COVID-19 pandemic relates to suicidal ideation.
Thank you, Clement. Thank you. That's actually, again, good points that are being raised. So thank you, guys. I now wanted us to kind of discuss on the misconceptions of suicide. So if you, any of you are following the CreateZim page, there was some posts that were put up, and some of the things that were said that can be said by people is that suicide is selfish, that, and also sometimes discussing suicide can give people more ideas. So I just wanted to ask you guys, what are your views on these sort of perceptions of suicide, especially a lot of us coming from cultural backgrounds, and how it can sometimes be deemed in Zimbabwe or in the Caribbean or wherever in Africa? What are your kind of views on the perceptions of suicide?
I would see it as more of a cry for help, and like I literally don't know what else to do other than take my own life at this point. Like, yeah, it's a cry for help without saying, "Can you help me, please?"
I would say the way we actually talk about mental health, especially from an African perspective, there's also a deep sense of denial, especially coming from, let's say, parents. Just the idea that, for example, if your child is like the last resort that people go, there are a lot of symptoms that go. And also another interesting fact is that one of the primary symptoms of suicide is actually the suicidal person saying out. They actually either threaten to kill themselves or they say it. So it's usually that we dismiss it, or it's just an element of denial.
Yeah, I just wanted to say about the misconception of suicide. I feel like in my culture, I'm Nigerian. I feel like one of the misconceptions, rather than them to deal with what they're going through or like try to overcome whatever war it is at the time, like committing suicide is just them trying to have an easy get out, rather than seeing the actual issue that there was at the start. So even though that they would mourn the person, they would just see it as you were just trying to get out easily rather than deal with what your situation. And it's so it's hard that actually suicide isn't just I'm killing myself for fun or I can't be asked to deal with this. It's you've been pushed, you've tried everything you can possibly, and you can't deal with it, especially when you're just dealing with it by yourself. And it's quite hard parents understand the mental health issues that you can go through that will actually push you towards committing suicide.
Thank you, Chelsea. I think what you guys have raised is such a good thing, especially everyone having their own background to kind of speak on it. It's such a big thing, I think, within family, that sometimes these things can be put aside, or you're kind of taught to kind of just man up, as people say, or just, you know, get through it, which sometimes is blocking out what someone's saying. So like you guys have said, I think that's actually a really good point to bring up. I just wanted to ask Clement if you would like to share your light on this as well, if by any chance.
Yeah, thanks, Anya. So we need to understand where they are coming from, and also share the information from the science realm, if at all we are going to impact change. If we think that science is just, you know, naturally superior to the indigenous belief system, which we call myths and misconception, then that's where the confusion might be coming from. You know that people in the community don't allow somebody who died by suicide to sleep over, like the body of somebody who died by suicide to sleep over in the house before they are buried. Usually they are taken from wherever they committed suicide straight to the burial site. That shows the weight that people have, or the resentment that the people have towards suicide. So people don't see it as a problem that needs assistance. They see it as a case that you are about to bring into the family. So we need to curb that case from coming into the family. And yeah, ultimately people who are facing suicidal ideations are not helped. But I think if we have this as one of the major topics that we share in schools, in primary schools, in secondary schools, then people are going to grow up with that information, and that might change the thinking processes around it.
Wow. Thank you, Clement. Again, another amazing point that has been raised. And as you said about us even teaching people about it so they can grow up with it, I'm now going to pass this next part on to Anopa, who's actually going to kind of allow us to lead into discussion more on that. So here you go, Anopa.
Thank you, Tanya. So we have looked at misconceptions of suicide, misconceptions around suicide, and we have looked at some of the facts and reasons why people commit suicide. So from here, the question is suicide something that we can control, reduce, or completely eradicate? Can there be a point where suicide is something we can totally eradicate, or is something we can reduce or control? What do you guys think?
We can completely say like we can eradicate suicide. Like as Tanya said, what we can do is try to curb down the rates of suicide. But then in doing so, I think the best way would be like suicide, I think it's a cry for help to an extent, right? And then if it's a cry for help, then we have to reach a point whereby we try to understand the person before and after. Or let me put it like before, like the general person. Like, let me take, for instance, I don't know, but like I know you, like the general you, like when you're happy, when you're sad, but I should be the type of friend who knows you like in depth, you know, like when you said I should be that visual about you. And I think that can help us in understanding because mood swings are associated with that. So if we have people who are very conscious about how they relate with other people, I think we can talk about reducing suicide rates. Yeah. That's all I can say.
Anyone else?
Yeah, can I add to that? We can. I feel like I don't know if suicide can be completely eradicated, but I feel like suicidal thoughts may always be there for some people, but suicide itself, I feel like you can reduce it enough, and I feel there definitely needs to be a lot more of help provided. There needs to be a lot more therapists available to speak to people, because even though, like Samuel said, you know, you should be able to tell when your friend's upset with something. Some people would rather speak to somebody who they're not close to, who doesn't know them at all on a personal level. Sometimes for some people it's easier for them to talk to a therapist who knows nothing, you know, like a clean slate, can just listen and actually hear them. And then also, from a university background, university students definitely have high suicidal rates as well. And the thing is, there's not enough help provided for them, because even when somebody that I know needed to talk to a therapist at school, she had to wait 3 months before they even got back to her and then declined her. And it was like, in that time, you think about what could have happened to her. Thankfully, she didn't do anything. But in that time where she just desperately needed to talk to somebody, no help was provided. So definitely a lot more help needs to be provided if suicidal rates are going to be looked at being reduced or being eradicated completely.
Okay, thank you. Anyone else?
Okay, yeah. I think from your question, as other people would say, to say we could eradicate it would be way too optimistic. But to reduce is something very possible. We can reduce it to manageable in the sense that suicide's usually never the first alternative that the person takes the coping mechanism. What that means, one of the ways to reduce it is to increase alternatives that suicide around a person. One of the things also we usually are talking about with my friends is that we actually normalized, made exercising, or like, you know, having good body shape, something which is trending now. But nobody's talking about mental health or mental fitness, which is something which can be trend. We can talk about therapy. It's something that people never talk about. Going for therapy is actually something you need. As much as you go to the gym to keep your body fit, you need to see a therapist once in a while. You need to read self-help, read something motivational. The adoption of purpose is also important as far as mental health goes. The conclusion that there's nothing purposeful to live anymore. When people adopt something purposeful, it could be something as simple as sport, a club, something that they can align or identify with.
Sure. Mr. Clements, can we hear from you?
Oh, there are many ways of reducing and controlling suicide and suicidal ideation. And it's not something that we can completely eradicate, because the way we are struggling with common mental disorders is the way we are going to struggle with suicide. We can put up measures to make sure that we mitigate the conversion rate of suicide. So people might have suicidal ideation that we might not have control over, but the actual committing of suicide we can reduce greatly by making sure that people have access to help, like making sure that people have productive lives. When people live productive lives, they have meaningful ways of occupying themselves, they have reason to live for. We also curb the rates of suicide. And when we educate people to be able to pick the risk factors and things that perpetuate or predispose them to suicidal ideation, we are also making sure that we are preventing suicide and suicidal ideation. And helping people to practice the culture of asking for help. Just the idea of knowing that I'm not okay, but it's still fine to ask for help. And it's fine to talk to somebody that I'm not, feeling okay by my feelings, my thoughts, and my behavior. So also another way of curbing suicide. Like we highlighted earlier, the cultural and social misconception also needs to be taken head on.
So on that, speaking of sexuality, how then do you identify that someone is about to commit suicide? Are there any telltale signs that we can use to tell that this person has become suicidal and they may as well take their life?
Yeah, there are ways that we can pick. Normal process is people can have a suicidal risk assessment. And the suicidal risk assessment might even start with, I'm assessing if you have any thoughts of taking your own life. If you ever thought in the past that this problem you are facing, the solution might be to take your own life. So we start by evaluating that. Then when you say yes to that, I want to understand, have you ever thought of ways of committing suicide? So with that, I'm already moving into knowing more about how you are planning to take your own life. And the ways that we can see that this one wants to take their life, they might talk about it, they might start to drug themselves, abuse of substances, they might start to isolate and stop taking care of themselves, they might go into extreme states of depression, they might even, hoard more like resources that are used for committing suicide. Those are things that we can actually see that this person wants to commit suicide. Then the other part of it is nowadays people research. You can see on the internet trade of a person who wants to commit suicide, they can research about ways of committing suicide that are quick, ways that you can use and, erase the traits and the people who go into those extremes. I have yet even read of people who go on holiday. They can even book a holiday resort where they want to go and commit their suicide. So all those things are things that we have to investigate when we are faced with the case of suicide. Yeah.
Okay.
And my question is, since there's this notion of the tendency of people comparing issues, if you understand what I'm saying. Yeah. So how would you tackle that, since communication is a major part? But then if you were to go to someone saying, can I talk to you about ABC, a problem I'm facing? Then at the end, that person who you're talking to ends up talking about their own life, so that you can understand that yours is just a speck of dust to them.
Okay.
I think people should understand that it's not the magnitude of the problem that matters, but it's the person's emotional capability of dealing with the problem. I can have a problem that you can deal with, but then I can't, if that makes sense. Or I understand that a problem might seem small, but it might be big to the person who is having that problem, and that can be affected. So if you have that understanding, then it's easier for them to help.
I was going to say, I think it kind of also depends who you go to as well. So like for me personally, I know that I have certain friends that I'll go to for this, certain friends that I'll go to for that. A therapist that can speak to you, because if you go to someone who's in therapy, they're not going to come back and tell you, yeah, well, I work 5 till 10 o'clock. My problem is this. Do you know what I mean? So I think it's about finding the right person. That's what I think. And I think that anyone who kind of does that is doing what we're trying to basically prevent, which is for people to just be understanding towards suicidal thoughts or any mental health problems. So yeah, that's what I think. I don't know if that
Yeah,
answers.
okay. Yes. No, thank you so much. Thank you also.
On behalf of CreateZim, would really like to thank you all for participating. This was a really educational meeting. I learned a lot personally, and I'm sure we all learned something. And yeah, thank you very much.